She was left broken at the altar, humiliated before the world. On the morning of her wedding, Vivian Ashford looked exactly like the headlines had promised she would. She was a vision in silk and light, thick, curvy, impossible to ignore. The fitted bodice hugged her hourglass figure. The cathedral veil spilled from her dark blonde curls like a waterfall of frost, and the diamonds at her throat were the kind that made people whisper numbers. Cameras would be allowed later, after the vows. For now, the only eyes on her were the staff ghosting through the Ashford estate with the quiet efficiency of people trained to never exist. Vivian hardly noticed them. She had grown up in a home where champagne was an errand, and people were furniture. The marble balcony outside her suite viewed gardens clipped to within an inch of obedience. Beyond that, the sea flared silver under the winter sun. Everything was curated, as if the day itself had been tailored by her stylist. Perfection wasn't a goal here, it was the rent. Sloane Archer, best friend, sometime rival, permanent witness, glided in wearing white workout silk and a weaponized smile. "Move an inch to the left," Sloane ordered, pinching the air. "The angles love you from there." Vivian obeyed. She always obeyed the mirror. The gown shimmered. Sloane's eyes flicked to the window. "Heard the caterer fired a server this morning. Spilled espresso on a senator's wife last month. Poor thing won't work in this city again." But, she shrugged, "We rise." "We rise," Vivian echoed, though it sounded flat. She lifted her phone, scrolling past congratulatory posts and thirst-trap comments about her fiancé. Damien Vale, venture capitalist, philanthropic darling, a jawline that photographed like a promise. Every notification reinforced the narrative. This wedding would stitch the Ashford name to the Vale empire. The world loved a merger. A knock, and her mother swanned in, scent of gardenias and strategy. "10 minutes to photos," Meredith Ashford sang, eyes sweeping her daughter for flaws the way a jeweler scans for clouding. "Keep your shoulders back. Your posture sells confidence." "Doesn't the ring do that?" Vivian quipped. Meredith's smile sharpened. "The ring buys it. Shoulders sell it." They kissed the air beside each other's cheeks. When her mother left, Vivian exhaled and touched the window, cool against her palm. Below, across the stone path, a man in work boots pushed a broom in deliberate strokes. He was tall and broad-shouldered, skin the color of summer bark where the light warmed it. A navy cap tugged low. She didn't recognize him. She didn't try to. The staff were part of the scenery. Appreciation wasn't necessary for function. "You're trembling," Sloane observed dryly, plucking at a stray thread on the veil. "Nerves?" "Nerves," Vivian said, though the word felt too small. It wasn't fear, it was a buzzing, like a trapped fly behind glass. It had visited in the last few weeks, whenever Damien's text replies grew clipped, whenever he dodged fittings, whenever his gaze slipped past her to some invisible ledge only he could see. A wedding coordinator materialized in a headset. "Miss Ashford, we're ready for the private first look. Mr. Vale is waiting in the winter garden." Just like that, the buzzing dissolved into ritual. Photographers swarmed the hall, lenses blinking open like metal eyelids. Vivian moved the way she'd been trained to, a slow glide worthy of a PR reel. Every glance held meaning. Every breath performed serenity. When she reached the French doors, she paused, smoothing nothing off her skirt, making sure the version of herself inside her head matched the one the world would consume. The winter garden smelled of rosemary and warmed stone. At the far end, Damien stood with his back turned, all edges and expensive restraint. I felt the camera's retreat to a respectful radius, leaving a thin membrane of privacy that would later be spun into content. "Damien," she breathed. He turned. Handsome, yes, always, but there was a stiffness around his mouth that no stylist could powder away. He took her in from veil to heel and smiled, but it was the kind of smile you give a stranger on a plane. "You're late," he said softly. "By 2 minutes," she teased, hoping he'd laugh the way he used to, the low sound curling up inside her ribs. He didn't.
He reached for her hands, then stopped halfway and let his arms drop. "Viv," he said, and the nickname felt like a door closing. "We need to talk." "Not now," she wanted to say. "Not with Rosemary and cameras and a coordinator timing our breaths. Not in the sentences the world would hear and repeat." But the buzzing returned, louder, and somewhere deep inside, a single tile of composure shifted. "After," she said, keeping her lips in their photo shape. He shook his head. "I thought I could—" He stopped, jaw tightening. "I can't. I shouldn't have hidden it this long. There are lines people aren't supposed to cross on wedding days. You don't confess, you don't unspool, you don't set fires. You recite, you pose, you crown the narrative." But Damien's face had the stubbornness of a man already on the other side of a decision. "What is this?" Vivian asked, because the question is cheaper than the answer. "I'm not who you think I am." And she almost laughed, because of course he was. She had introduced him to the city, revised him where he needed revising, taught him which forks and which donors. But his eyes were steady, raw. "I'm in love with someone else." The rosemary snapped into sharp focus. The cameras breathed. Sloane's breath caught somewhere behind a shrub. "Don't be theatrical," Vivian said. "Do it clean." She didn't recognize her own voice, a chipped diamond. He glanced at the photographers, then at her. For a flicker, she saw Damien the man, not the brand. Tired, selfish, maybe honest. He said, "I'm sorry. I can't marry you." He left. It wasn't dramatic. He simply turned and walked away, the way a person exits a meeting that ran long, the way a man who believes in doors uses them. The coordinator paled. Sloane's hands flew to her mouth. Someone said, "Keep rolling." Then someone else said, "For God's sake, stop." Vivian stood alone in a garden built to hold two. She watched the gap where Damien had been and tried to summon indignation, then tears, then anything. Nothing came. The buzzing turned to silence so complete she could hear the pressure of her own blood. The first sound was the bouquet hitting stone. She didn't remember dropping it. The second was her breath turning ragged, a horse startled at the bit. Sloane's hands touched her shoulders, too light for gravity. "Viv, we can spin." Vivian shrugged her off. When she moved, the gown didn't float. It dragged. She shoved through the doors, through the hall, past a blur of faces rearranging themselves around humiliation. Voices chased her, her mother's command, a publicist's calculus, a priest's sorrow, but none could keep pace. The mansion's front doors yawned, and she fled into cold air procured at great expense to look like December. Outside, the estate unfurled in terraces and cliffs. Guests clustered at windows, their shock already composing captions. Vivian's heels knifed grass. At the edge of the property, beyond a low stone wall and a chain-link fence meant to keep tourists safe from themselves, the cliff dropped into the sea in a clean, merciless line. She had always disliked that fence. It was ugly, necessary, like truth. Wind tore at her veil. She reached the gate, a maintenance latch left unfastened by someone with other concerns, and pushed through. The world narrowed to the thin strip of packed earth leading to the overlook. Waves folded into themselves far below, relentless, uncaring, honest. "This is foolish," a practical voice said, the one that handled budgets and nail appointments. It wasn't answered by another voice, only the throb of misery, the hot ache of being watched and found wanting. Tomorrow's headlines bloomed like bruises in her mind. Jilted heiress, Ashford disaster, Vale escapes. She saw herself refracted in 1,000 cruel angles. Too much, not enough, wrong kind of woman, wrong kind of love. Wind slapped her cheeks, stinging them alive. She took one more step. "Hey!" The word cut clean through the weather. It wasn't the shape of pity or scandal. It was steady and low, the kind of voice that knows storms up close. She stiffened. She didn't want witnesses. She didn't want saving, if saving meant owing. Don't. She turned. The man from the path stood a few yards back, breathing a little hard, cap in his fist, broom abandoned somewhere behind them. Up close, his face was all plains and quiet strength, eyes dark and unfrightened. His jacket was cheap and clean. His hands looked like work. He didn't move closer. He didn't look at her the way people had been looking at her.
All morning, consuming, calculating, feeding. He looks like a person standing in front of a person. "You shouldn't be out here," he said, calm as the horizon. "It's slick." Vivian's laugh came out wrong, too bright, too brittle. "You're here because I saw you come through the gate," he said, "and because the wind is cruel today." She wanted to snap that the wind was the least of her problems. She wanted to suggest he get back to whatever lowly assignment had been scribbled against his name on a clipboard inside. But her tongue felt heavy. The cold dug into her bones. Her throat tasted like metal. "Go away," she murmured, not trusting what her voice might become if it tried for more. He nodded once, as if the command made sense. He still didn't move. "It's none of my business, but I can stand here if you need a witness to the edge and a path back." Witness, not hero, not savior. The words settled. A beat, then another, then the long tide of something loosening in her chest. She wasn't ready to step away. She wasn't ready to jump. She was suspended between the life she'd lived and the cliff that promised relief without mercy. "What's your name?" she asked, because it was easier than asking for help. "Malik Carter, grounds crew, sweeper." Of course he was. Of course the first person to use her name like a person today would be the one paid to erase footsteps. Vivian looked past him to the yawning estate. Lights, guests, gilded expectations, and then down at the dark water flexing far below. The veil tugged again at her hair, as if the wind wanted to unmake her. "Vivian," she said, hearing how small it sounded without Ashford attached. "I'm Vivian." "I know," Malik said. Not flatteringly, not hungrily, just fact. Just witness. The gulls wheeled. Somewhere behind them, distant applause rippled as if an event, someone else's, some other life, had reached a tidy conclusion. Here, on the cliff, the moment held, imperfect and unscripted, waiting. "Please," Malik said quietly, the word bare of everything except intent. "Come off the edge." Vivian closed her eyes. For the first time that day, she realized she didn't want an audience. She wanted a choice. She took a breath. The wind took the veil, and she turned. Vivian Ashford had never thought silence could weigh so heavily. After Damien's betrayal at the altar, after the cliff's edge and the stranger's steady voice, she found herself stumbling back across the cold grass, her gown snagging against the earth like a stubborn ghost that wouldn't let her go. Behind her, the grand estate roared with whispers and champagne-fueled gossip. Ahead, the man who had stopped her, the sweeper, walked at her side, not touching, not crowding, but present. His presence annoyed her, if only because it steadied her. She didn't want steadiness. She wanted rage, destruction, a hurricane of something to drown out the shame that throbbed in her veins. Yet every time her knees weakened, he adjusted his pace so subtly that she could lean against the illusion of control. "What do you want from me?" she spat suddenly, the words more desperate than sharp. Malik turned his head just enough for their eyes to meet. His gaze was calm, dark, and maddeningly unreadable. "Nothing," he said simply, "just making sure you don't fall." She hated how reasonable it sounded. By the time they reached the shadowed servant's entrance of the estate, Vivian's legs gave out. She sank onto the stone steps, clutching the folds of her ruined gown like a lifeline. Mascara streaked her cheeks, pearls dug into her throat, and humiliation clung heavier than the veil the wind had stolen. Malik stood a few feet away, his broom nowhere in sight now.
his cap held in one hand. He looked as though he belonged to another world entirely, a world of sweat and calluses and unspoken dignity. His jacket was worn, his shoes scuffed, but there was something about his stillness that made her feel more seen than all the cameras that had once begged for her smile. "You should go," Vivian muttered. "Go back to your work. Pretend you didn't see this." "I can," Malik replied quietly. "Just be sure you still here. Alone." The word struck her harder than she expected. Alone. Yes. For all the grandeur, for all the curated perfection she had been raised to worship, she had never felt more abandoned. Not even her so-called friends had come running. Not Sloane, not the glittering guests, not her mother, who was likely already calculating damage control. They had all let her crumble in public, and now she was just debris in a dress. Her lips trembled. She hated how her voice broke when she whispered, "They'll destroy me. My friends, the press, my family, everyone saw it. They'll say I wasn't good enough. They'll say I was worthless." Malik's expression didn't change, but his jaw tightened. He lowered himself onto the step below her, keeping distance, respecting boundaries. "They don't decide your worth," he said. Vivian laughed bitterly, the sound like glass shattering. "Spoken like someone who's never lived in my world." "Maybe not," Malik admitted. "But I know what it feels like to be invisible, to be written off before you even open your mouth. I know what it's like to work in a place and still not belong." Her chest tightened. She wanted to scoff, to dismiss his words, but something inside her cracked instead. For the first time all day, she wasn't being told how to stand or smile. She wasn't being coached or pitied. She was being spoken to. Honestly. Plainly. It unnerved her more than Damien's betrayal. A long silence stretched between them, broken only by the murmurs of guests leaving through the front. Vivian's eyes burned, but no more tears came. Her body felt empty, scraped clean of everything but dread. Then, almost recklessly, the thought surfaced, "I need to fix this." Not for love, not for Damien, but for survival. Her reputation couldn't be left to rot. She couldn't be the woman left behind. She needed something, someone to rewrite the story. "Marry me." The words were out before she had even thought them through. Her voice rang sharp in the night air, foreign to her own ears. Malik blinked, stunned. "What?" "Marry me," she repeated louder, as though volume could make it sane. "If I marry someone, anyone, I won't be the woman abandoned at the altar. I'll be the woman who moved on, who took control." Her hands trembled as she clutched her gown tighter. "You're perfect for this. You don't want my money. You're not chasing my status. You disappear right back into the shadows when this is done." Malik stared at her, his expression unreadable but his eyes sharp with disbelief. "You don't even know me." "That's the point," Vivian snapped. Her voice cracked with hysteria she couldn't hide. "I don't need to know you. I just need this. Please." The word please caught her off guard. She hadn't begged for anything in her life, but here she was, begging a sweeper, a man she hadn't noticed until today, to save her from drowning in shame. Malik's lips pressed into a line. He didn't mock her, he didn't flinch. He only studied her, as though weighing more than her words, her posture, her brokenness, her desperation. For a long moment, the night held its breath. Finally, Malik exhaled slowly. "If this is really what you want, I'll do it." The relief hit Vivian so hard she nearly sobbed again. She hadn't realized she'd been holding her breath until it escaped in a shudder. Without ceremony, without rings, without even witnesses, the deal was sealed beneath the fractured sky. Vivian, the heiress who once thought herself untouchable, had bound her name to the man who swept the dust of her world from the floor. The hours that followed blurred. Vivian remembered flashes, the press still swarming the estate, her mother's furious hissed threats, Sloane's wide-eyed disbelief. She remembered announcing with brittle poise that she had already married another. The shock on their faces almost satisfied her. Almost. But it wasn't until much later, when she stepped into Malik's Wadis apartment for the first time, that the enormity of what she had done sunk in. The place was small, neat, lived in. The walls bore framed photographs of a family she didn't know. The furniture was worn, but cared for. The air smelled faintly of soap and something warm. "This isn't exactly what I imagined married life to be," Vivian muttered, arms crossed tightly as she glanced around. Malik set down his jacket, unfazed. "It's not what I imagined either." She sank onto the sagging sofa as though it might stain her dress. Her chest heaved with exhaustion, her thoughts spiraling. This was temporary. It had to be. As soon as the scandal cooled, she would figure something out. Until then, this man, this stranger, was her shield. "You know this isn't real," she snapped suddenly, her voice sharp like a whip. "We're not married, not really. This is just an arrangement." Malik leaned against the armchair across from her, his posture steady, unthreatened. "I know. No need to remind me." The simplicity of his answer unsettled her more than defiance would have. She turned away, staring at the muted television across the room, fighting the gnawing thought that this was the first time in her life she had spoken to a man who wanted absolutely nothing from her. That night, lying stiffly on one side of the bed, a gulf of silence separating her from Malik, Vivian realized the truth. They were husband and wife only by name. In reality, they were still two strangers bound by desperation. And yet, for the first time since Damien had walked away, she didn't feel entirely alone.
The morning sunlight spilled thinly through the crooked blinds of Malik Carter's apartment, slicing lines across the plain beige walls. Vivian Ashford sat stiffly at the small dining table, shoulders drawn tight beneath the borrowed ivory blouse she'd hastily packed. Her phone buzzed with messages she refused to open. She already knew what they would say: pity dressed as curiosity, malice disguised as sympathy. The world had crowned her the woman left at the altar. Except she wasn't, not anymore. She had married Malik. The thought made her chest tighten, though she wasn't sure if it was in relief or humiliation. The apartment itself unnerved her. It wasn't dirty, far from it, but it was painfully ordinary. A sofa softened by use, a coffee table scarred with faint rings from mugs, walls decorated only with family photographs and a faded calendar. It smelled faintly of coffee and laundry detergent. Vivian had grown up surrounded by glass chandeliers, imported roses, and marble floors that echoed with her heels. Here, the floorboards creaked and the kettle whistled when the water boiled. Malik emerged from the narrow kitchen, a dark jacket thrown over his broad shoulders, his expression unreadable. "I'll be back later," he said simply, sliding his boots on. "That's it?" Vivian asked, arching a perfectly sculpted brow. "No schedule? No list of instructions for your wife?" The word dripped with sarcasm. Malik met her gaze evenly, unbothered. "You don't need me to tell you how to breathe, Vivian." She bristled at his calm tone. "I'm not used to being ignored." "I'm not ignoring you," Malik replied as he pulled the door open. "I'm giving you space." The door closed behind him before she could retort. The hours dragged. Vivian wandered the apartment like a caged bird. She touched the spines of his books, manuals on carpentry, a worn Bible, a dog-eared collection of poems. She ran her fingers across the photographs on the wall. Malik as a boy grinning beside a tired-looking woman she assumed was his mother, Malik as a teenager in a basketball jersey, Malik, older, standing beside coworkers in faded uniforms. There were no diamonds, no staged portraits, no perfectly posed holiday photos, just life, captured in fragments. She hated how foreign it all felt. By late afternoon, Vivian's irritation boiled into fury. She was Vivian Ashford, heiress, socialite, once envied bride. Now she was pacing a shoebox apartment, waiting for a man who swept floors. When the door finally creaked open, she snapped, "Where have you been?" Malik glanced at her as he carried a brown paper bag into the kitchen. His jacket was damp from rain, his hands red from cold. He said, "Working." "You left me here all day." "You seemed determined not to need me." Vivian's retort caught in her throat. She watched as he moved through the kitchen, pulling out containers. Minutes later, he emerged with a tray, a steaming bowl of soup, and a hunk of bread, plain but inviting. He set it down in front of her.
"What is this?" she asked warily. "You're sick," Malik said matter-of-factly, his gaze softening. "I noticed you coughing last night." Vivian blinked. No one, not her mother, not Damien, not any of her so-called friends, had ever noticed something so small about her. She swallowed hard, defensive. "I'm fine." "You look like you lost a fight with Winter," Malik said gently. His voice carried no mockery, only quiet concern. She stared at the bowl, steam curling upward like a fragile offering. "Why are you doing this?" she whispered. Malik paused near the doorway, his back straight, his presence steady. "Because that's what people do for each other, even strangers." Then he disappeared into his room, leaving her with the soup and a silence that wasn't suffocating, but strangely warm. Vivian's throat tightened as she lifted the spoon. It wasn't fancy, but the warmth seeped into her bones. For the first time since the wedding, something inside her eased. A week later, the two of them found themselves in a grocery store aisle. Vivian pushed the cart stiffly, her diamond-studded sunglasses perched like armor. Malik trailed behind, his calm presence both comforting and irritating. Whispers rose the moment people noticed them. A fallen heiress with a black sweeper. It was gossip too delicious to ignore. Vivian kept her chin high, but her grip on the cart whitened her knuckles. The moment grew sharper when two women stepped into their path. Old acquaintances. Both draped in luxury coats, both smiling with venom barely concealed. "Vivian Ashford," one of them drawled, feigning surprise. "Didn't think we'd see you here. Things have really changed." Vivian forced her lips into a smile. "Clearly." The second woman's gaze slid toward Malik, who stood silent behind her. "And who's this?" Vivian faltered, insecurity clawing at her throat, words tangled. Before she could answer, Malik stepped forward. "I'm her husband," he said firmly, his voice calm, but carrying an authority that silenced the aisle. "I think we're blocking others here, so if you'll excuse us." His words weren't loud, but the steel in them made the women stiffen. They muttered apologies and stepped aside. Vivian stood frozen, her heart pounding, not in shame, but in something else entirely. No man had ever spoken on her behalf like that, without expectation, without performance. Just quiet, steady defense. As they walked away, she glanced at Malik. He didn't smile. He didn't look for thanks. He simply pushed the cart forward as if nothing had happened. But for Vivian, everything had. For the first time in her life, she felt safe. Days slipped into weeks. The arrangement that once felt like a prison began to resemble routine. Vivian, once obsessed with chandeliers and designer gowns, began to notice the beauty in small silences. The way Malik hummed softly when cooking, the quiet rhythm of his broom against the floor, the steadiness of his presence when the world felt too heavy. One evening, rain tapped gently against the apartment windows. Vivian sat curled on the sofa, flipping through an old magazine. Malik entered from the kitchen, drying his hands on a towel. The air smelled faintly of roasted vegetables. "I didn't know you could cook," Vivian remarked, surprised. Malik shrugged as he sat across from her. "When you grow up fending for yourself, you learn fast." His tone was simple, not fishing for sympathy. Vivian studied him, really studied him, for the first time. Not Damien's cold composure, not her parents' controlling authority, just a man, relaxed yet confident, who never pretended to be more than he was. Without realizing it, she smiled faintly. "You're full of surprises." Malik raised an eyebrow, playful for the first time. "You saying that like I'm a mystery novel?" Vivian laughed, genuine and unguarded. The sound startled them both. She clapped a hand over her mouth. "I haven't laughed like that in months." Silence followed, but it wasn't awkward. It was easy. Vivian leaned back, her chest lighter than it had been in years. "You know," she said hesitantly, her voice softer now, "I always thought people like you and I had nothing in common. But now I think you understand me more than anyone else ever tried to." Malik's gaze lingered on hers, steady and kind. That's because I don't see what you used to show. I see you when you're not pretending. Her throat tightened. Gratitude, affection, something unnamed pressed against her ribs. Flustered, she stood abruptly. I should head to bed, she muttered, retreating. But as she walked away, her steps felt lighter. Behind her, Malik's lips curved into a knowing smile. The walls she had built so high were finally beginning to melt.
The storm outside rattled the window panes, but inside Malik's apartment, the world was unusually quiet. Vivian sat by the window, her legs folded beneath her, watching the rain snake trails down the glass. Her arms were crossed, though not in arrogance anymore. It was nerves. Behind her, Malik sat at the dining table, sorting through bills, his steady presence grounding the room. For weeks, their lives had danced in a fragile balance. Strangers by name, companions by circumstance. Vivian had grown accustomed to the rhythm of Malik's world. The morning coffee he brewed without a word, the steady way he left for work each day, the subtle kindnesses he never announced but always delivered. She hated how much she noticed. She hated more that she cared. "Can I talk to you?" Vivian's voice broke the silence. Malik looked up, surprised but attentive. "Of course." She hesitated, words tangling inside her chest. "I've been thinking about us, about this arrangement." Her laugh was nervous, sharp around the edges. "I mean, marriage, whatever you want to call it." Malik leaned back in his chair, eyes steady on her. He didn't press, didn't interrupt, just waited. Somehow, that patience made her heart beat harder. "I don't know when it happened, but somewhere between you ignoring my tantrums and making me soup when I was sick, you became the only person I look for when everything goes quiet." Her throat tightened. She turned, her green eyes locking with his. "You see me. Not the headlines, not the family name, just me. And I never thought I needed that. But I think I love you." The words hung heavy in the air, fragile and dangerous. Vivian's heart pounded as she searched his face, terrified of ridicule, of rejection. For the first time in her life, she had bared herself without polish, without armor. Malik's lips parted in surprise. For a moment, his composed mask slipped away, revealing something raw and vulnerable. Then, slowly, warmth spread across his face. He stood, closing the distance between them with deliberate calm. "I wasn't expecting that," he admitted softly, his deep voice carrying a sincerity that made her heart ache. "But I'm glad you finally see me." Tears stung her eyes, though none fell. She exhaled shakily, relief washing over her like rain after drought. There were no grand gestures, no sweeping music, no chandeliers. Just honesty. Just them. In that sacred moment, love didn't shout, it whispered, and they both heard it. The days after that confession shifted suddenly, almost imperceptibly at first. Vivian no longer referred to Malik as the sweeper in her mind. He was Malik. Steady, kind, infuriatingly patient Malik. And Malik no longer kept his distance. His silences were still quiet, but they were no longer walls. They were spaces she was invited into. One evening, the invitation turned public. A charity gala, the kind Vivian had once ruled effortlessly, buzzed with glitter and whispers. Chandeliers dripped crystal light across polished marble floors, violins hummed in the background, and the city's elite paraded their worth in gowns and cufflinks. Vivian entered hand in hand with Malik, her posture poised, her heart steady. The room fell into hushed disbelief. Heads turned, eyes narrowed, whispers rippled like wildfire.
The fallen heiress had returned, not with a mogul or a tycoon, but with the man who had once swept their floors. Rachel, Vivian's oldest friend and fiercest critic, stepped forward. Her designer gown shimmered, but her smile was brittle. Vivian, she purred, her voice laced with venom. So this is real. Her eyes flicked to Malik with disdain. Vivian tightened her grip on Malik's hand. Her gaze was calm, but fierce. Yes, Rachel, very real. Another voice cut in from the crowd, dripping with judgment. You traded your world for this? Vivian turned, facing the sea of disbelieving faces. Her heart beat hard, but it didn't waver. Gone was the woman who once craved their validation. No, she said clearly, her voice echoing through the tense hall. I didn't trade my world, I found it. Gasps rippled through the room. Malik remained silent beside her, his dark eyes protective yet proud. You all see what you want to see, she continued, her tone unwavering. Status, race, worth. But when everything fell apart, only one person stood by me. Not for my name, not for my money, but for me. And you love him? Rachel scoffed, her lips curling. Vivian turned to Malik, her eyes glowing with quiet certainty. More than I ever thought I could love anyone. The hush that followed was absolute. No more whispers, no more sideways glances. Vivian had broken free from their judgment, from her old self, from the invisible chains she hadn't realized she had worn her entire life. Hand in hand, she and Malik left the hall. This time Vivian didn't care who watched. She wasn't fleeing. She was walking into freedom. Later that night, back in the modest apartment, Vivian sat cross-legged on the floor, her hair loose, her makeup washed away. Malik sat on the couch above her, struggling to assemble a small bookshelf they had ordered online. His large hands worked patiently with the stubborn screws, his brow furrowed in concentration. Vivian laughed softly, her voice warm. This is definitely not your calling. Malik chuckled, shaking his head. Not all of us were trained to assemble overpriced furniture. She leaned back, watching him with a smile that lingered longer than she intended. The man she had once dismissed as invisible, beneath her notice, now filled every quiet space in her heart. Her voice softened, her words unguarded. You know, there was a time I didn't believe someone like me could ever belong in your world. Malik paused, meeting her gaze seriously, yet tenderly. Vivian, there's no my world or your world anymore. There's just ours. Those words, simple, unpolished, true, settled deep inside her. She reached for his hand, their fingers intertwining effortlessly. They didn't need diamonds or crowds. They didn't need headlines or chandeliers. The real love story wasn't about proving themselves to anyone. It was about peace found in arms that held no judgment, only choice. As the storm outside faded into the soft hush of night, Vivian realized something profound. She had been broken at the altar, humiliated and discarded. But here, in a small apartment, with a man who once swept floors she wouldn't deign to walk on, she had been rebuilt, piece by piece, not into the woman the world expected, but into the woman she had always been meant to be. And this love, quiet, strong, undeniable, was hers, forever.
Morning light slipped gently through the thin curtains of Malik's apartment, bathing the room in a golden glow. The world outside roared with its usual impatience, traffic horns, hurried footsteps, the hum of a city too busy to care. But inside, there was peace. Vivian sat cross-legged on the floor, her long hair loose around her shoulders, wearing a simple ivory blouse that hugged her curves. She looked nothing like the dazzling heiress who once graced society magazines. She looked real, almost unrecognizable to herself, and yet for the first time in years, she felt whole. Malik was crouched in front of a half-assembled bookshelf, brow furrowed in concentration as he tried to align two stubborn wooden panels. His large hands moved with patience, though his muttered frustration betrayed him. "This is definitely not your calling," Vivian teased, her voice tinged with amusement. Malik shot him a look over his shoulder, his dark eyes glinting with humor. "Not all of us grew up surrounded by people paid to build things for us." Vivian laughed, a soft, genuine sound that filled the room. She leaned back on her palms, studying him with an affection she no longer tried to hide. There had been a time when she saw Malik as invisible, a background figure sweeping away dust in her world. Now, he was the anchor that kept her from drifting. "You know," she said quietly, "there was a time I didn't believe someone like me could ever belong in your world." Malik paused, setting the screwdriver aside. He turned, his gaze steady, his voice tender but firm. "Vivian, there's no my world or your world anymore. There's just ours." The words settled deep in her chest. She reached for his hand, their fingers intertwining. For a moment, they sat in silence, connected by something more powerful than any contract or vow. Weeks later, Vivian received an invitation to a high society gala. It was the kind of event she used to rule. Charity auctions, silk gowns, whispered rivalries beneath the chandeliers. Once, she would have considered it her stage. Now, it felt like a trial. "Are you sure you want to go?" Malik asked, watching her fold the invitation with trembling hands. "Yes," Vivian said, her voice steady despite the nerves swirling inside her. "I need them to see. Not for approval." She paused, searching for the truth in her own words, "but so I can finally close the chapter they wrote for me." Malik studied her, then nodded. "If you're sure, I'll be there." And he was. The gala glittered with decadence. Strings of crystal lights cascaded from the ceiling, and champagne glasses clinked like delicate bells. Vivian entered in a modest but elegant black gown, her hand resting firmly in Malik's. Heads turned, whispers followed. The room that had once bowed to her name now buzzed with disbelief. Rachel, her oldest friend turned critic, approached with her usual cocktail of envy and condescension. "Vivian Ashford," she said smoothly, her eyes raking Malik with disdain. "So it's true. This is real?" "Yes, Rachel. Very real." Another voice rose from the crowd, laced with scorn. "You traded your world for this?" Vivian turned, facing the sea of skeptical faces. The old Vivian might have wilted beneath their gaze, but not anymore. "No," she said clearly, her voice carrying across the room. "I didn't trade my world, I found it." Gasps rippled through the crowd. Even the violins faltered for a beat. "You see status, race, worth," Vivian continued, her tone unwavering. "But when everything fell apart, only one person stood by me. Not for my name, not for my money, for me." Rachel scoffed, her lips curling. "And you love him?" Vivian smiled softly, turning to Malik, her voice lowered, intimate but certain. "More than I ever thought I could love anyone." The hush that followed was deafening. No whispers, no sideways glances, only silence. Vivian had broken free, not just from Damien's betrayal, not just from society's judgment, but from the prison of her old self. With Malik's hand in hers, she walked out of the hall. This time, the exit wasn't humiliation, it was liberation. Life after the gala wasn't perfect, but it was theirs. Vivian adjusted quickly to a rhythm she had once thought beneath her. Grocery store runs, cooking side by side, quiet evenings curled up on the couch. The clatter of Malik's keys on the kitchen counter became a sound she cherished. The scent of his soap on her pillow comforted her in ways no diamond necklace ever had.
One morning, she woke to find him at the small dining table, sipping coffee and scanning through bills. She watched him silently, her chest full to the brim with something she no longer feared naming. "Do you ever regret it?" she asked softly, her voice barely above the hum of the city outside. Malik looked up, brow furrowing. "Regret what?" "Marrying me. At first it was just desperation, my way out of humiliation." Her throat tightened. "I dragged you into this. You didn't even know me." Malik set the mug down and leaned forward, his voice steady as stone. "Vivian, you weren't the only one desperate that night. You think I didn't see it? You were standing on a cliff, ready to disappear. If marrying me was the rope that pulled you back, I'd do it again, every time." Her eyes filled with tears she didn't bother to hide. She crossed the room, cupped his face in her hands, and kissed him, not as a performance, not as a transaction, but as a choice. Months passed. Vivian never returned to the Ashford estate. She never needed to. She built a new home with Malik, not in marble halls, but in warmth, laughter, and love that whispered instead of shouted. One morning, sunlight streamed into the apartment as Vivian sat on the floor, flipping through a worn magazine. Malik fiddled with the bookshelf again, pretending not to notice her amused smirk. "You'll never win against that thing," she teased. Malik grinned. "Maybe not, but I'm stubborn." She laughed, leaning back against the couch. Watching him, her heart swelled with a gratitude so profound it frightened her. "Malik?" she asked softly. He glanced at her, curious. "There was a time," she whispered, "when I thought being left at the altar ruined me forever. But now I know it saved me, because it led me to you." Malik's eyes softened, his expression both steady and tender. "You weren't ruined, Vivian. You were just waiting to be seen." Her lips curved into a smile as she reached for his hand. Their fingers intertwined effortlessly, their love unspoken but undeniable. They didn't need chandeliers, crowds, or approval. They didn't need marble estates or gilded vows. What they had was stronger. A love rebuilt from ashes, forged in quiet moments, and chosen every single day. Vivian Ashford, once broken at the altar, had found her forever. Not in the man the world had chosen for her, but in the one who had simply seen her when no one else did. And that, she realized, was the kind of love that never shattered.